The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
The news comes to you compliments of KFC. It's finger licking good. With the news, I am Ruth Wilson. Good evening. First, the highlights. Government is seeking to assure Guyanese that the Amila Falls hydropower project is above board. A policeman has been arrested because he allegedly beat a dumb and deaf man. In the region, in Trinidad specifically, 2 sisters were early this morning burnt to death when their house was firebombed during the island-wide blackout. And Barbados may be laying off workers or increasing taxes. Details of these and other stories and international news from the BBC in a moment.
Is it a special occasion? Are you on a budget but still want a filling and also mouth-watering meal? Look no further. KFC is here for you at 9 locations and 6 drive-thrus, including the Amazonia Mall at Providence, which now delivers from Shore Base to Little Diamond. Call 632-0533, 6080-162, or 503-3591. KFC.
It's finger licking good.
And now for the news in detail. Government's project leader for the Amila Falls hydropower project, Winston Brassington, says that the $700 million electricity project is above board. He says that the hydropower plant will be built based on the highest environmental standards and rigid international contracts. Mr. Brassington says that the Guyana government will be recruiting a firm to supervise the construction of the hydropower station that will sell power to Guyana Power and Light at about 7 US cents per kilowatt.
We also said that we will have independent supervision, which will be internationally tendered, to review the works that are being done. So we will hire, through a public tender, a world-class international project supervision firm to ensure that what is being designed and built is built to those standards. We also agreed that we will have an international O&M operator. So when it's built, we will have someone who will be competent to operate this.
Mr. Brassington says that the Guyana government will not be investing any money in the construction of the Amila Falls hydropower project. The Canadian company Frontiera, the major partner in the joint venture with CGX Energy, has announced that it will be spending more than $100 million on the drilling of a second exploration well in the Quarantine Block. Chief Executive Officer of Frontiera, Orlando Cabrales, says his company and CGX expect to spend $110 to $130 million on exploring for oil in Guyana, mainly to drill WE-1. Minister of Natural Resources Vikram Bharat welcomes the move by CGX and Frontiera to drill the second well after their first discovery, the Kawa-1 well in the Quarantine Block.
We have heard some good news from CGX in the Quarantine Block, which is important to us as a country because it takes development to another part of Guyana, which is very necessary too. So we look forward to further exploration by CGX in the Quarantine Block, as well as the Demerara and also Repsol. Exxon is in the Kanji and the Kaitro block doing exploration currently. So we hope that we can have discoveries in those blocks too.
Last year, the company had initially planned to spend $85 to $90 million on exploration at the Kawa-1 well, but had later said that cost could have gone up to between $110 to $125 million by the end of the drilling there. The Guyana Revenue Authority says it is cracking down on the trade in smuggled cigarettes and alcohol products. The authority says all importers wholesalers and retailers of alcoholic and tobacco products must be affixed with an excise stamp in keeping with Guyana's customs law. The authority, in keeping with this regulation, has intensified its law enforcement efforts, which have led to several seizures of illegal or uncustomed brands. The authority, in its ongoing effort to tackle the trade of illicit tobacco brands, have been telling importers, wholesalers, retailers, and users of tobacco products that the legitimate imported brands, which are so far approved under the Tax Laws and Health Act, are Mall, Bristol, Dunhill, GT Smart, Darkies, and Manchester. The Revenue Authority takes this opportunity to reiterate its commitment of working together with legitimate importers and the general public to ensure compliance with the various tax, trade, and border laws. As such, persons and companies who may not be fully compliant are hereby urged to visit the Revenue Authority headquarters to regularize their trade affairs and become compliant, since a zero-tolerance approach is being adopted against smuggling and any form of tax evasion. Offenders may face penalties as stipulated under the laws inclusive of prosecution. A mining pit has collapsed at Highwood Backdam, Northwest District, killing a gold miner. He has been identified as 58-year-old pork knocker Christopher Bunbury of Pakera, Matthews Ridge, Northwest District. Preliminary investigations by the police in the region state that the southern wall of the dugout mining pit collapsed and covered the victim. He and another workmate were at the time of the incident digging gravel at the bottom of the southern wall, which collapsed. Police say his workmate, Hilton Ward, ran out of the pit and later returned with two other workmates, Paul Bunbury and Wilfred Bunbury, both of whom assisted in a search for the victim. His motionless body was found about 45 minutes after, and there were no marks of violence, as were seen by police. A Guyana Police Force constable has been placed under close arrest for allegedly beating a dumb and deaf man. The incident occurred on February 10 at Orandwick in Region 8. The force says its Office of Professional Responsibility is investigating a report in which the constable allegedly physically assaulted the 35-year-old resident of Kurukabaru, who is reported to be physically challenged. Police say the man has visible signs of injuries and has received medical assistance from medics. You're still with us here on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. It is 18 hours 8. We now turn to news in the region. In the midst of Wednesday's blackout in Trinidad, a house was firebombed early Thursday morning, killing two sisters. Trinidad and Tobago authorities are still trying to determine the specific cause of the blackout that also affected cell phone service. More in this report from TT News Online.
In the midst of Wednesday's blackout, a home in Currap was firebombed at around 12:10 a.m. Two sisters, Amanda and Alicia Charles, aged 30 and 31, died. First responders to the scene were answering a call about a structure on fire located at number 60 Watt Street in Currap. When they arrived, they saw smoke emanating from an apartment building that was ablaze. A crowd of onlookers alerted responders to three people inside the burning building. The front door of the apartment was breached, and the three occupants of the apartments were brought out unconscious. The fire services and the emergency health services were contacted, and the victims were rushed to the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. Upon arrival, Amanda succumbed at 12:58 a.m. and her sister Alicia was pronounced dead at 1:43 a.m. One man, 38-year-old Fidel Guerra, remains hospitalized.
Barbadians are bracing themselves for a layoff of public sector workers or an increase in taxes. This part of the International Monetary Fund (IMF) prescription for economic recovery of that largely tourism-dependent treasury. Already in bad shape, the Barbados economy had been further battered over the past 2 years by a significant reduction of tourists due to the COVID pandemic. Details in this report from Barbados Today.
The business community is bracing for possible public sector layoffs and or increased taxation in the new financial year. This as government pursues ambitious fiscal targets imposed by the International Monetary Fund. And the president of the Barbados Private Sector Association, Tricia Tannis, is calling on government to protect the social fabric by ensuring that the working class is shielded from the brunt of the pending adjustments. Back in December, the IMF declared that government would once again be asked to reach a 6% fiscal surplus by the 2024-2025 financial year, after relaxing its targets to provide the fiscal room to respond to the recent natural disasters and the COVID-19 pandemic.
It is reasonable to expect that there is going to be some degree of hardship. I believe that there will be a very strong sense that the social network must be protected in that. I do endorse the call that we may need to look and further those discussions with the IMF, see whether or not, there's opportunity to soften the expectation. I do agree, particularly there's going to be a negative impact on the social safety. But having that aside, I think it is not unreasonable to expect that there will be some adjustment. If there's revenue generation, then that speaks to that. If there's cost cutting, unfortunately, labor tends to feel the brunt of cost cutting. I'm hoping, though, that cost cutting, before we go and look at anything other than, that anything that affects persons, because of course when you look at labor, then you're touching the social safety net, which you really can ill afford to touch at this time, even with our society. So we're hoping that there's innovations and looking at public sector reform and seeing where we can tighten without affecting labor.
That report from Barbados Today. In Antigua, the principal of the Otto's Comprehensive School, Foster Roberts, is claiming that a group of students may be involved in the latest incidents of vandalism at the school campus. He is also calling for the level of security at schools to be improved. The latest incident took place sometime between late Tuesday and early Wednesday, when the perpetrators forced their way into the principal's office by breaking through burglar bars. Speaking to Observer on the grounds of the campus yesterday, Roberts disclosed that the school had previously been broken into on Sunday before being targeted yet again. Mr. Foster said the principal's office was a target of the latest break-in. While the perpetrators did not make off with anything of great value, the incident is still disappointing. Stopping short of naming names, the principal of Otto's Comprehensive School in Antigua explained that several observations made in the aftermath of Sunday's break-in point to the likelihood of some students being involved. School break-ins are certainly not a new phenomenon in Antigua, with several campuses falling victim to the crime over the years. In fact, the Education Ministry was prompted to install CCTV cameras at a handful of secondary schools based on the frequency of the incidents at one point. In the Bahamas, 4 members of the police force have been charged with manslaughter. We get the latest from our News Bahamas.
4 police officers were charged with manslaughter in connection with a killing that took place in Nassau Village on November 13th. 29-year-old Archibald Miller, 30-year-old Thomas Thurston Jr., 29-year-old Leo Dormius, and 29-year-old Kevin Greenslade are accused of causing the death of Danrico Carey by means of unlawful harm. The 4 officers weren't required to enter a plea to the charges, which stem from the decision to shoot and kill Carey as they responded to a matter at a business establishment in Nassau Village. They were granted $9,500 bail in the Supreme Court and must report to any police station with a bail management kiosk before 6 p.m. on Fridays.
And St. Martin is cracking down on illegal labor to curb high official unemployment. Daily Herald St. Martin reports that Minister of Justice Anna E. Richardson says the recent multi-agency controls are necessary. Richardson says St. Martin is struggling to thrive because of high unemployment, poor tax compliance, among other reasons. Justice Richardson said that some officers had taken videos of the recent controls in Simpson Bay to safeguard themselves on how they are interacting with people. She said that in one of those videos, a controller tells a law law enforcement officer that he appreciates that law enforcement has joined the controls because the controllers were often ignored when visiting these establishments and requesting compliance. According to the judge, letters had been sent to those establishments before entering, but the businesses showed resistance because they believed they had political protection. She said that the government must also look at businesses that do not register at the Department of Economic Affairs, do not apply for their employees at the Ministry of Public Health, Social Development and Labor VSA, and do not ensure that workers are legal residents on the island. It's 18 hours 15. We now turn to international news from the BBC.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. The US Secretary of State has urged Russia to formally announce that it will not invade Ukraine. Antony Blinken told the Security Council in New York that this could be demonstrated by sending troops back to barracks and engaging in diplomacy.
The Russian government can announce today, with no qualification, equivocation, or deflection, that Russia will not invade Ukraine. State it clearly, state it plainly to the world, and then demonstrate it by sending your troops, your tanks, your planes back to their barracks and hangars, and sending your diplomats to the negotiating table.
Mr. Blinken was speaking amid concerns that Russia may be trying to engineer a pretext for an invasion of Ukraine, following shelling between the Ukrainian army and Moscow-backed separatists in the east of the country. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister called Mr. Blinken's comments regrettable and dangerous. Russia has threatened what it called a military technical response if Washington fails to meet its security demands, including the withdrawal of all US troops from Eastern and Central Europe. The warning came in a formal response to an American letter rejecting Moscow's call for guarantees that Ukraine will never be allowed to join NATO. Barbara Platt-Usher is in Washington.
In the document, Moscow said for the first time it was ready to talk about mutual inspections of missile sites, but it accused Washington of failing to constructively address its main security concerns about NATO expansion, and again threatened an unspecified military technical response if these remained off the table. Russia's expulsion of America's deputy head of mission in Moscow added to the tensions. The State Department said the move was unprovoked and called it an escalatory step.
A New York State judge has ruled that the former President Donald Trump and two of his children must comply with subpoenas issued by the State Attorney General and give evidence under oath in her investigation into fraud. Letitia James has been looking into the Trump Organization's affairs and whether it improperly stated the valuations of various real estate assets to obtain more favourable loans, insurance rates and tax benefits. A massive rescue operation is continuing in the Brazilian city of Petrópolis to find any survivors from the catastrophic mudslides which struck on Tuesday. At least 105 people are now known to have died. Katie Watson is there.
You can see where the mud came through this neighbourhood, wiping out every single house in its wake. Hundreds of firefighters and authorities are now on the ground trying to help with the recovery effort. But it is such a huge expanse. It's very hard to see where they actually are. It doesn't look like many people are on the ground. But overall, there's a feeling here that help didn't come soon enough.
World News from the BBC. The National Assembly in Ecuador has approved legislation to allow women and girls access to abortion in cases of rape. The vote follows a ruling by the Constitutional Court last April, decriminalising the procedure in such instances. MPs had previously voted down similar legislation. The Jordanian army has warned of a shoot-to-kill policy as it confronts increasingly organised drug smuggling from Syria. Sebastian Usher reports.
Since the start of the year, there's been an alarming surge in violence on the Jordanian border as traffickers have increasingly been using armed men in their efforts to smuggle huge quantities of drugs out of Syria. Last month, a major battle ensued, with the army saying that it killed 27 traffickers in a single operation. The army says that less than 2 months into the year, it's already foiled attempts to smuggle 16 million Captagon pills into the country. The outlawed amphetamine is the smugglers' main product and has been at the heart of the expansion of the drug trade in Syria into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise.
At least 5 people have been killed in severe storms that have been battering Europe, with winds gusting up to 180 kilometres per hour. 2 people died in Poland when a large crane was blown over at a construction site in Krakow. Falling trees killed drivers in both Poland and Germany. More winds are on their way. The last remaining Yamana speaker has died at the age of 93, taking the indigenous Chilean language and the culture of her Yagan community to the brink. Cristina Calderon had worked to save her knowledge following the death of her sister, the only other person with whom she could speak Yamana, and had compiled a dictionary with translations to Spanish. But her daughter said a wealth of knowledge had died with her, though the possibility of rescuing the language remained open thanks to her work. BBC News.
And that's the news to the moment.
On the go and need to grab a quick bite, but tired of the same dreary food? Well, KFC is here to brighten your day with a delicious, mouth-watering meal with their 9 convenient locations: Movie Town, Vlissingen Road, Mandela Avenue, Regent Street, Stabroek, Hink Street, Redenhoop, Parika, and the Amazonia Mall. Now open from 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. And they're there to welcome you every day. KFC.
It's finger licking good.
To end the news, here's a recap of the highlights. Government is seeking to assure Guyanese that the Amila Falls hydropower project is above board. A policeman has been arrested because he allegedly beat a dumb and deaf man. In the region, in Trinidad, 2 sisters were early this morning burned to death when their house was firebombed during the island-wide blackout. And Barbados may be laying off workers or increasing taxes. The news came to you compliments of KFC. It's finger licking good.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.